Imagine being in a shaft so tight your arms are pinned to your side, your body is pressed down against the cold, damp floor by gravel, and your foot is pinned in place by a boulder. It's pitch black, and the only things you hear are the drip of freezing water hitting your face and the beat of your own heart. Have you ever heard of Floyd Collins? To give you an idea of where this story is going, his tombstone reads, "The greatest cave explorer ever known." And for pretty good reason, because his rescue operation was such a catastrophe that it was the third most talked about event between the First and Second World War. So to give you an idea of who Floyd was, he was born in 1887 in the Mammoth Cave National Park area, and Mammoth Caves is massive, like 426 miles of explored caverns covering around 50,000 acres, that kind of massive. And at the ripe old age of 6, Floyd would sneak off and explore the caves on the family farm, which is freaking wild if you think about it. And once he started, he never stopped. Fast forward to 1921, Floyd is now in the middle of the Kentucky Cave Wars. Yeah, I never heard of it either, but because the area was absolutely shit for farming, being mostly hilly terrain, it just didn't work, so the locals looked for extra income. And with Mammoth Caves becoming a tourist destination, if you had a cave and were close to the main road, there was money to be made by offering up cave tours. Now, Floyd, being the explorer he was, had already found many caves, one of them being Crystal Cave. And while he did occasionally get tourists to come visit, it was just too far away for a steady income. So he made a plan. He met with his 3 neighbors who were butted up against the main road and offered a deal. He would find a cave and set it up, and they could just help with the tourists. And they would split it 50% to him and 50% between the 3 of them, and also asked that while he was searching and setting up a cave, they would alternate giving him room and board, which they happily agreed to. And this guy was stupid good at finding caves that in just a couple days, he found a small little opening in the ground. Digging it out, he found a shaft going down and spent the next 3 weeks digging out the opening. Now, Floyd was working 6 days a week, only taking Sundays off to stay with his family. And out of all the wild things he has done and all the sketchy situations he's been in, he never felt uneasy about a situation until one Saturday night, he had a dream where he was stuck in a cave, cold and wet, not being able to move. This freaked him out so bad that he woke up breathing hard, shivering, and soaked with sweat. Telling his stepmother about it the next day, she told him that she's also had a terrible feeling about this cave and wish he would just move on. But Floyd had heard this thousands of times from people and just blew it off. But the dream did bother him, as he had been underground almost as much as above and never once had a dream like this, so it kind of lingered. Now, January 30th is where everything kind of starts to spiral. Waking up early, Floyd was feeling pretty excited and told his neighbor that today was going to be the day he makes it to the cavern. His neighbor, however, was pretty worried about him because he knew how much Floyd had been pushing himself, and Floyd was looking pretty wore out. So he told him, he's just like, "Hey, I need you to be careful, and there's literally no need to rush with this." But Floyd, taking off anyways, arrived at the mouth of the cave. He set off his pack, grabbed his tools, and headed down. Now, while heading down this extremely narrow passageway, he noticed a boulder that kind of looked loose and just took a mental note to clear it out later. Moving on to where he thought the cavern was. Now, this cavern wasn't exposed yet. He just knew it was close because last time he was working there, he could hear rocks falling while he was working. And finally, he found it. He found the massive cavern that was going to bring in the tourists. Lowering himself down, he looked back up at the tiny hole he climbed through and was amazed he could make it through something so tiny. Then, Floyd just took the time to sit back and admire what he had done. Weeks of work and he made it, a place no man has ever been before, and the feeling was pretty euphoric. Now, while Floyd was admiring it all, he lost track of time and noticed his lamp flicker. Checking it, he had plenty of fuel, but then it flickered again. Better to be safe than sorry, he started climbing his rope and head on out. Once he made it to the shaft, he came upon that area that was extremely tight that he had to shimmy through, and his lamp went out. Now, this didn't bother him, and he knew the exit wasn't far, so he tossed the lamp up ahead and put his hands down against his sides to start shimmying through. There was no room. Not having use of his hands, he was pushing with his feet, and not knowing exactly where he was because of the light situation, he pushed against the boulder he checked earlier and it came loose, and when it did, it pinned his right leg down. Now, Floyd wasn't concerned. It wasn't too big of a deal. He literally just needed to push it a bit and he could work free. Using his other foot, he started kicking and pushing it and started to work it free, but the movement and vibrations caused the loose gravel above the stone to start falling down, and the more he moved, the more it came down, to the point it covered most of his body. Now he was in a situation, but he still wasn't worried. He knew someone would come looking for him and they could help him out. The only thing he was really upset about was the awkward cramped position, and knew he wouldn't get any rest from this. The next morning, the neighbor he was staying with started to get pretty worried about Floyd. Knowing he never made it back, he goes off to the other neighbor's house and they agree to go check on Floyd. Arriving at the mouth of the cave, they see his supplies are still there, and they crawl down into the cave to start yelling for Floyd. Now, Floyd, who hasn't slept or moved, hears them and yells back that he's pinned down and needs them to go get help. The neighbors take off and try to find help, but nobody really knows what to do, and they can't find anybody willing to go down. The media starts picking up on this and it starts spiraling. Now, Floyd's brother Homer took off a few days prior to go to Frankfurt and buy a used car and planned to stay a while, catching up with some old friends. However, after only a couple of days away, Homer gets a bad feeling that he can't shake, and he tells his friends he really just has a feeling he needs to get home. Now, the weather has gotten bad and the snow is coming down, and his buddies are trying to get him to stay because of how dangerous it is. But Homer won't listen. He's starting to panic, and so he goes ahead and takes off. The 2-hour drive ends up taking all night because of how bad it is outside, but he keeps pushing to make it back to town. He stops to get a bite to eat when a young kid comes running up and asks if his brother's still stuck. Homer jumps up and asks what the boy means, and the boy said, yeah, they said your brother was stuck and was dying. Well, Homer hauls ass to the cave site, and pulling into the neighbor's driveway, he sees tons of people standing around. Jumping out, he follows the crowd to the cave and starts to head in when someone tries to stop him, saying it was dangerous and not to go down. Homer explains he's my damn brother and I'm going in after him no matter what. Now, this is 2 days after Floyd gets stuck, and so far nobody has managed to get into the passage. Homer starts yelling for Floyd and Floyd responds, "Oh, I think I hear my baby brother." Homer starts heading into the shaft, and when he sees his brother, he has a hard time understanding how he even got there. His body is pinned and his head is smashed kinda sideways. Floyd, being the person he is, just kinda explains what's going on and tells his brother it's really no big deal, he'll be fine. Homer starts digging, and the only idea Homer really has is to start pulling the gravel out from underneath of his brother till he can crawl over his body and dislodge the rock. Well, Homer works for hours on end until his fingers are raw, and not only that, he's shivering because he's stripped down to fit into the hole. Floyd tells Homer he's fine and it's really no big deal, but he needs to go and get some rest. As Floyd's worried about him, Homer breaks down crying. He couldn't help it. Like, his brother, who is literally trapped, is more worried about him being tired and cold than himself. Floyd just asks Homer if he could get him some food and water because he's kind of hungry. You know, a couple days will do that to you. And then he asks Homer if there's anything he can do about this water dripping and why it's even coming in, as it was dry when he first climbed in. This is when Homer remembers all the spectators and media outside telling his brother that they've been building bonfires to keep warm. Plus, with all the warm bodies up there, it's starting to melt the snow and it's letting it run into the cavern. At this point, Homer leaves the cave and goes and tries to get some rest, and after a couple hours, he goes and gets Floyd some food, returns back to the cave, noticing that there are way more people than there were, but goes ahead and climbs on in and proceeds to hand feed his brother because his brother can't move his arms, they're pinned to the side. He continues working for another 8 hours straight, getting to the point where he can see his brother's hands, and he notices how mutilated Floyd's fingers are from lying there trying to move the gravel away and ended up working them down to the bone. So Homer, after working to exhaustion again, leaves the cave and runs into a reporter. Now, he's been pestered by the reporters this whole time, but every time they've asked him what's going on down in the cave, he just simply tells them, "Why don't you go down there and find out yourself?" To which all of them say, "No, they're good." But this reporter in particular comes up to him and asks the same question, "What's going on down there?" To which Homer once again replies, "Why don't you go down there and find out?" And to his surprise, this reporter does go down there and find out. Not only that, but this guy ends up putting in the most effort to dig Floyd out than anybody there. He's a scrawny, wiry reporter, and he can just fit right down in there. Now, here's where things start to look up. The reporter gets enough of the area dug out because he's such a small, wiry guy that he can get back to the area where the rock is, or at least get close to it. They come up with a simple idea. Get a car jack, slide it underneath the rock, and lift it up off of Floyd's foot, freeing Floyd. However, they realize that this car jack is way too big, so they come down with a 4-inch lift. Now, as per usual, everything in this situation is a problem, and this jack is just too small. So they start blocking it up. Well, being in this confined space, everything is so hard to just maneuver around, they don't really have enough room to wiggle the jack handle. But they're trying. The problem is the jack keeps kicking out, and after hours of trying this, they realize it's just not going to work. And this is where Floyd kind of loses all hope. Returning to the surface, they sit back and they try to come up with a new plan. At this point, the media is everywhere. There are thousands of spectators watching this event, so much so that it's almost turning into a circus. The neighbors are out there selling hamburgers for 25 cents. People are setting up food stands and selling knickknacks, and somebody's selling moonshine. It just turns into a whole lawless ordeal. But not only is this creating chaos, there are so many people there that it's raising the temperature of the area too much. And this creates the problem of melting the ice around the cave mouth and ends up collapsing the entrance, making it impossible to get down into the shaft where Floyd is. Now you can imagine being in a shaft so tight, your arms are pinned to your side, your body is being pressed down against the cold damp floor by gravel, and your foot is pinned in place by a boulder. It's pitch black, and the only things you hear are the drip of the freezing water hitting your face and the beat of your own heart. And you know everything they have tried has failed, and you really might not escape this time. Everybody knows time is running out. Floyd's been down there for approximately 12 days, so they come up with a new idea. They're going to dig a tunnel or a shaft straight down 50 foot and lift the boulder off of Floyd. They estimate that with 75 people digging in 2-man shifts, they could reach Floyd in 30 hours, and they start digging. Now, the first part of this hole is going fantastic. They dig down 20 foot with nothing but loose soil and are making great progress. That is until they hit boulders. Then they have to set up a crane, they have to start using pickaxes, and they have to start lifting these boulders out. And then they get to the point where they're hitting just solid rock. Well, this takes a little bit longer than the 30 hours, but they do finally reach Floyd, and the first miner down there realizes that his body is cold and he had passed away. Now, the medical examiner had to guide one of the miners to go down and check the body, giving him special instructions to test and see how long Floyd had been dead. He figured 3 to 5 days. Now, assuming Floyd had passed away at the earliest time, he had survived down there for 14 days straight before dehydration, hunger, and hypothermia got to him. Thinking they could never retrieve the body, they put his gravestone on the hillside and left Lloyd there. They couldn't get to him. However, his brother could not stand it, and eventually, 2 months later, dug him out and had him moved to a graveyard. But what's weird is the family decided to sell the farm. That's not weird. But the person who bought the cave ended up moving Floyd's body and putting it in a casket with a glass cover inside the crystal cave, which is what people said that he would have wanted anyways. However, some years later, somebody noticed that the body was missing. Yes, somebody stole the freaking body, and they went out looking for it and found it in a field just a little bit off. However, his crushed leg was missing. They returned the body to the casket, and they had that area of the cave closed down so nobody could access it anymore. And whenever Mammoth Caves got turned into a national park, the family asked that the body just be moved to a cemetery, to which the national park agreed and sent a team that took 15 days to move his tomb out of the cave and have it brought over to a local cemetery. And that is the story of Floyd Collins.